Vale. Fortune Eternum, el flail, nuevo arma. Let's go.
To sell like the weight of the weapon, because we could animate the chain and we could, really sell like the impacts and like the sweeping motion.
Let's go. No sé lo que ha dicho. Vamos a verlo.
Welcome to Fortune Eternum, where we talk about all things New World. Today we're going to be talking about the new weapon coming out on the expansion, the flail. I'm joined today by Josh, who designed this weapon, our combat designer, JR, our player experience lead, and Kyle, the sound designer on the weapon. So let's jump right in and start with you, JR. Why did we choose the flail? Like, why of all the potential weapons that we could have created did we sort
Porque
of
va a estar
land on
roto.
this?
Punto.
Well, we actually started the development of this weapon years ago, and it had started as actually we were thinking about doing a whip, and through much iteration and much back and forth, we tried lots of different concepts, and we ended up actually coming back to something more whip-like, but with the flail. It was this weapon is it's it has
Quiero ver imágenes.
different aspects to it, but it's partly tank focused and partly healer focused. And that was like kind of an archetype that we didn't have in the game yet. So it's very much like a paladin type archetype that we did this weapon.
Lo están diciendo
Josh,
ellos.
what was sort of like some of the inspiration early on when you were designing this weapon?
Well, some of the inspiration for it was trying to kind of add an additional level of experience that was very limited that we already had, like JR said, where we had our healer, which was the life staff, we had the tank, which was the sword and shield, and then we kind of wanted to be able to add additional stuff for both of those based on like kind of being able to get two birds in one stone. So we added kind of a tanky aspect to it, which is the shield part where it's very defensive and supportive, and then the flail, or the healing aspect of it, which adds to healing and a kind of additional support aspect of it. So we were able to go strength and focus and in a way kind of add two weapons in one.
And then Kyle, tell me a little bit about the sound, like early on, like what are you thinking about in terms of like the aesthetic and sound for the flail?
Yeah, this one was really fun to work on, because it kind of straddles the line between physical and magic. So it was fun to play into what, when you see something happen on screen with a chain type flail weapon, there are sounds that you inherently you think of. You're just kind of designing cool stuff to cover that, and then from there you can be more creative and really expand your palette with the magic stuff. All the arcane kind of like elements here and there came from really out there sound design techniques. Very, none of it is. You have the natural stuff and the physical stuff kind of grounding it, and then the arcane stuff peppered in to give it that magical feel.
Sonidito,
and it's funny that it started as a whip too, because whips were actually a huge inspiration in the soundscape as well.
And then what about, you briefly mentioned, how does this weapon scale? What are the attributes that it scales on?
So its primary scaling is strength, and then secondary is focus. So it does do less scaling on the focus, but that's because it has a lot more utility with the healing. We added some additional functionality where the buffs will scale based on how much focus you have. So there's some where the duration starts relatively low, but the more focus you put into it, the duration will go up, or it'll just get more power. And so we went with strength to kind of aid into more of a kind of bruiser, tanky style build, and focus to do support and healing. And so just to make it as versatile as possible. And it's the first weapon that we have that is a strength and focus combination.
That's cool. JR, you mentioned a little bit about this, but one of the things that I think is coolest about this weapon is it's the first weapon that has animation in the weapon itself, right? Tell us a little more about that and like how we use that.
Yeah, so this was the first weapon that actually has animation on the weapon itself, and that involves like actually creating a rig.
Se refiere a que tiene movimiento, no es estática. El modelo 3D se mueve, tiene animación.
And so the player character has bones that get animated, and so does the flail itself. So it was one of the more complicated weapons to actually execute on because of that, and it required a lot more animation iteration to just get it to feel really good. But it was very important to sell like the weight of the weapon because we could animate the chain and we could, really sell like the impacts and like the sweeping motions. So it was like kind of pivotal to the flail experience.
Yeah, it's really cool because we call it a flail, but it's important to note that that head of the flail really animates very far out in some of the moves. So Josh, tell us a little bit about the two trees. Obviously, we don't want to give too many spoilers, but give us a little high level of what the two trees are and sort of what the focus of each one is, and maybe highlight one ability or something in each tree that you like.
Okay, yeah, so the left tree, it's called the cleric tree. It's mainly focused for healing and support, but support via kind of debuffing enemies, but then also simultaneously healing or buffing your allies. So be aggressive, attack things, and heal and buff them at the same time.
Clérigo es el de daño.
The right tree is called the bastion tree. It's more about defensiveness and
tanking. El derecho es de tanque, básicamente.
And kind of similar to the other tree where it's all about attacking, and then you buff your allies, give them more defense, increase your own survivability, and kind of you can mix and match the trees to kind of get combinations, but each one kind of strengthens itself by kind of going all in on it. And then certain abilities that stand out. So the right tree, the bastion one, there's one called Barrage, which is a pretty big fan favorite for most people, but you charge forward, you can pass through all the enemies and allies and just
esa habilidad va a estar muy tocha, ¿eh? La de cargar hacia adelante. Lo dije que iba a tener esa habilidad, ¿eh? Lo dije. Como los de la forja. Los que van con escudo y maza en la forja. Lo dije que iban a ser esos. Igual que el nuevo arma.
And so that one definitely stands out. And then for the cleric tree, one of my personal favorites is called Arcane Vortex, and it's just visually very kind of magnificent in a way. There's very awesome VFX to it. Your character spins and a flail spins around several times, and it just looks and stands out like just visually.
It's a cool one. And Kyle, what about you? Like when you were making these moves, any standout move, any stories about sort of the creation of the specific ability sound effects you got?
Well, I could talk about the ability that you just mentioned, the Vortex one. There, I don't want to give too much away, but there are, the VFX are very kind of like particleistic. So I used something called granular synthesis, which can take an audio file basically and use like little grains to like play different pieces of that file.
Acércate un poquito más al micro, niño.
So using like some natural source and then putting it into my granular synth and then hitting a key on the keyboard gives you like a really particle-y sounding, kind of glassy, like magic style sound that fit really well with that ability.
Mola.
And what about whips? You mentioned whips. How did you use the whips in the filming?
Yeah. There's a couple abilities that look a bit more whip-like than some. So with the closer distance sounds, it was more taking the envelope or like kind of the shape of the whip sound. It's kind of like quiet at the very beginning, and then you hear it come up really fast, then there's a loud crack, and then it goes down really fast as well for like the volume of it.
Está guay esa habilidad.
And then with the distant sounds, I actually use a lot of like, everybody knows the sound of like the whip crack, and it like kind of echoes in the canyons and whatnot. So there's that, and then mixed in with kind of whistly whooshes that like fit really well with like something that's whippy. It was, like a whoosh, whoosh.
Oh. Qué guapo el sonido, ¿eh?
So those are blended in when you get a little farther
Está
out,
guapo,
and give it a different kind of sound when you're more distant.
Sí suena así.
Cool. One more thing for you, Josh. You mentioned we have some new tech where things scale off focus. We also have some new tech in this weapon that, based on which shield type you're using, things change.
Eso es lo
right?
interesante.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Lo del escudo.
Yeah, we wanted to kind of give shield some additional value and kind of mix up what kind of happens with each type of shield. So for a lot of the upgrades to abilities or even some of the passives, there's functionality changes based on what shield type you have equipped. So some will potentially do more damage if you have the round shield, give you some sort of increased defense or grit if you have the tower shield, and then the kite, right now the kite shield kind of gets a little bit forgotten. It's not, left behind.
Es de lágrima, dice el de
So we
lágrima.
wanted to kind of give the kite shield some pretty good value to kind of mix up the builds people use.
Cada escudo te va a dar un buffo
One of the
distinto.
abilities, it staggers. If you use
Hay
the
una
kite shield,
pasiva que
which
te
it
va a
normally
dar
doesn't
eso.
if you used a round or tower shield. And then the other one, the kite will give just some other additional functionality and interesting benefits based on which one you use.
That's cool. Finally, some love for the kite shields. I like it. Well, that was our deep dive into the flail. I hope you enjoyed the program. I do have a community question for you all. What will be the weapon that you pair the flail with? What will be your 2-weapon combo? Let us know in the comments. Also, like and subscribe if you're enjoying the show, and see you in Eternum.
En el Next Fortune Eternum, Community Q&A. Community Q&A en el siguiente Fortune Eternum, ¿vale? Tengo muchas ganas de entrar al PTR y jugarlo, tío. Tengo muchas ganas de entrar al PTR y jugar el mangual, tío. Va a estar espectacular, gente. Qué ganas tengo, tío. Es que va a estar muy guapo, tío.